Welcome to the 6th episode in a Legendarium series about the history of medieval trade. In Part 6, Death of the Old World, we will talk about how the Silk Road unknowingly spread the Black Death across Earth. The 3 centuries from 1000 to 1300 AD had been a time of explosive expansion of both the population and economy of medieval Europe. For the first time since the days of the Roman Empire, commercial markets reached deeply across the continent. As the golden age of medieval trade blossomed, Mongol Khans extended their empire from the Pacific to Eastern Europe. By doing so, they made it possible to revive the Roman-era Silk Road, which brought Asian goods from China to Europe. The medieval Silk Road brought a wealth of goods, spices, and new ideas to medieval Christendom. It included a network of land and sea routes that connected China with Europe. The road became a vital source of fabric, leather goods, spices, and precious stones for medieval states. Additionally, the Silk Road allowed for the sharing of innovations such as paper making and printing technology. Along this network, villages, towns, and outposts called caravanserais, located about a day's travel apart, served as rest stops. Caravans of traders and camels traveled back and forth between the local nodes, trading their wares and returning home. Most of them operated in smaller local networks rather than venturing along the entire route. In a tragic historical irony, this route likely also brought the bubonic plague from its original foci in southern Siberia. Unfortunately, rats travel with human beings in sacks placed on pack horses, ships, and camel caravans when they become too overpopulated for their homes and look for a new home elsewhere. This meant that merchants unknowingly carried plague rats, which had the plague bacterium in fleas nested within their fur. The Black Death, unknown to humankind in living memory, blazed across Eurasia, sweeping through the great population centers of China and Southwest Asia. It caused the deaths of as many as 150 million of Earth's 500 million people. Monkish chroniclers, with their eye for omens, wrote of the days before the Black Death, describing terrible earthquakes that released poisonous gases, rains of fire in the east, and rumors of war everywhere. A generation after it first emerged in China, the Black Death swept through Europe. Kaffa, a Crimean Black Sea port, served as the jumping-off point for the Black Death in 1346. Genoese and Venetian merchants fled the plague city of Kaffa by boat. Their vessels became death ships, their holds filled with the dead and dying, some still going from port to sell their wares. Captains struggled to keep ships going as sailors collapsed from the plague, and sometimes the sick and dead rolled around on deck. By keeping to their routes, either to trade or flee, these plague ships infected Constantinople and Athens as they made their way home to Italy. The trade network, which so enriched Europe, now became a spider's web, spreading plague venom. When the Black Death reached Europe, it ravaged a population already weakened by the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317. Wherever the Black Death went, it left terrified survivors packing churches to pray for miracles or seeking scapegoats in Jews or Muslims. The plague killed anywhere from 27 million to 35 million Europeans in a continent of only 75 million people. Its horrific toll may have claimed anywhere from 1/3 to 1/2 the continent over the course of 7 years. Unsurprisingly, it also left the economy of Europe devastated. Once thriving cities became virtual ghost towns, and dogs roaming the streets dug up trenches to eat human corpses. Whole fields, cultivated for generations, came to lay fallow and overgrown with weeds, since no peasants could plant and harvest crops. By the year 1400, the population settled at half its pre-Black Death level, likely 35 to 40 million. After the Black Death, depopulation had greatly reduced the workforce, and peasant labor suddenly became an important and increasingly rare asset. Suddenly, the peasants were in a position to call the shots. The lord of an estate could not feed himself, his family, or pay tithes without negotiating with the peasants. Suddenly, lords and ladies had to put up with peasants talking back and even leaving for another lord if they wouldn't pay up. The lives of peasants vastly improved as they could afford silk, fur-lined clothing, and even silver buckles. One anguished snob wrote, "The common people would no longer work at their accustomed trades. They wanted the dearest and most delicate foods, while children and common women clad themselves in the fair and costly garments of the illustrious who had died." Even better, the peasants could simply demand an end to the most hated feudal practices like the death tax. When the moneyed classes tried to return the peasant to his previous condition, they only sparked uprisings such as the 1358 French Jacquerie, the Guild rebellions of 1378, and the famous Peasants' Revolt of London in 1381. Though these peasant uprisings never broke the feudal system, it would never work as well for the lords again. That wraps things up for this episode of the Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.